Hello, friends. My name is Ty, and I'm going to read to you. This is a non-fiction piece, so a bit of a departure from the stuff I've read before, about my dad's eldest brother, Rory. I wrote this a number of years after he died because I was thinking about him a lot, and I hope you like it. Warning for strong language. I have something to tell you, my Uncle Rory, my father's eldest brother, said to 12-year-old me as I walked beside him down the main street of my hometown. And I need you to pay attention. Okay, I said, completely focused on what I was sure was going to be pure wisdom. If a woman is ever giving you a blowjob and she bites down, you have to cuff her so she won't do it to the next guy. Having no real idea what a blowjob was, I merely nodded and stored the information away for possible future reference. Good, he said. I'm glad we talked about this. And so were the lessons learned at the knee of my most interesting uncle. Rory was the eldest and most dynamic of 5 children. He was also, I learned later in life, an extremely troubled man. He was cut from a different cloth than his brothers, and my father especially, which is probably what drew me to him. My father was a good man, honest, true, courageous when pressed. But there was no adventure in him. Rory was like a hurricane, a storm that came up on you suddenly, gave you a grand ride, and then dumped you off while you were still trying to wonder exactly what happened. At the age of 17, he demanded his father's blessing to join the Canadian Navy. At the time, he espoused his desire to serve his country, and in the years immediately following the war in Korea, it was almost a believable argument. But I suspected it was more a desire to escape the roof of his parents and chase the disquiet in his soul that seemed to put an ever-present itch in his feet and call on him to move. In the time I knew him, he did not live under the same roof or in the same town for more than 2 years at a time. Possessed of incredible natural talent, Rory could sing in a deep, rolling baritone, learn to play almost any instrument by ear, and recite lines from Robert Service poems with a tingling intensity that would stand your hair on end and make your heart ache. He took up bodybuilding at the age of 50, and within 6 months of setting foot in a gym, looked as though he were ready to step onto a show stage, or win a powerlifting competition. Despite all his undeniable talent, Rory was never able to stale himself enough to do anything with it. He was extremely fragmented and was never constant. He had the uncanny ability to be whoever he thought you wanted him to be, but was never exactly the same person twice in a row. He was also dreadfully intelligent, and at the peak of his life was an extremely successful businessman, with stakes in real estate, several businesses, and the stock market. But at the lowest point, Rory found himself on the Lower East Side of Vancouver, stealing liquid shoe polish from a local drugstore so he could drink it. When he'd had a couple of drinks one day, fortunately not shoe polish, he explained the mechanics one needed to employ the dire straits of shoe polish consumption. You had to drink it very quickly, he explained. Then hold your mouth shut with both hands so you didn't puke it up before you could absorb enough of the alcohol to get intoxicated. He tipped me a big wink and he finished his explanation. And I'm still not entirely sure why. Of course, when I was still in my teens, I didn't know or didn't understand any of the baser things about Rory, and probably wouldn't have cared even if I did. Rory was a character who was larger than life, and made himself grander than I could even imagine him, and my rebellious teen spirit craved his company. He enjoyed the role of mentor, and cultivated my awe whenever he could. Be careful of him, my mother told me in my early teenage years, as my rebellious teen infatuation with Rory increased. He can be anything you want him to be when it suits him, but he can be a real vicious bastard when it suits him too. My father said nothing, trusting his brother enough to know he would never hurt me, and I would learn my lessons and have my disappointments about him in my own time. It was not until I grew older and saw enough of the world to know bullshit when it came upon me that I was able to look at Rory without idolizing him. The shiny veneer that he had presented to me when I was a kid got a little worn, and I was able to see the cracks underneath. I learned that Rory had been married 6 times, his last wife 30 years his junior. The first 5, my father told me when I asked him about it, had all left Rory when they finally grown tired of his act, and probably wished him dead. He had a son from his first marriage, who refused to acknowledge Rory as his father, because Rory had stepped away from his crib and did not contact him for nearly 30 years. Rory had not reached out, in fact, until he had fallen on hard times and needed to borrow money. borrow being the loosest of terms when interpreted by Rory. I learned that he was cheap and would swindle people if he could, and lied through his extremely straight teeth whenever it was convenient. I also got a look at the mean streak my mother always warned me of, but I still doubted. At a family gathering, Rory tried to snatch a water bottle from my father, and when my old man challenged him, Rory flung it into his face with enough force to draw blood from his lip. And I noticed, with a hard smile that didn't touch his eyes firmly fixed on his face. He apologized profusely after and claimed the bottle had slipped from his hand, but really I think he was angry at being called out and wanted just a hint of revenge. Despite that flinty mean streak, he showed up in the stands the day I graduated the police academy, taking pictures and cheering wildly as I saluted the commanding officer and received my badge. He cried so hard when he hugged me and buried his face on my shoulder that he soaked through my shirt. I could not help but smile at that and be glad of his presence. As I grew older and my knowledge grew with me, my contact with Rory fell off. He was forever full of antics and manipulations, and the man I became was not entertained by what had so joyed the youth I had been. But occasionally he would call or write, and I could not help but be pleased by the correspondence. At the conclusion of each conversation, he told me he loved me, and he was proud of the man I'd grown into. Always, I told him I loved him too, and I did. For all his faults, Rory tried to give me his best. He would talk to me of the subjects he referred to as the things that matter. Mostly these conversations revolved around the qualities of what made a good man. As I sit now, I don't believe that Rory knew what a good man really was, but every once in a while he would try and figure it out, and I guess that will have to be enough. In the later part of his middle age, Rory was diagnosed with aggressive prostate cancer. The cancer was discovered early enough that there were some treatment options, but they were limited. The primary option, Rory told me, was full castration to eliminate the production of testosterone, which accelerated the prostate cancer, and injections of large quantities of estrogen. Rory, who by this time had turned to the ministry, which really meant fundamentalist born-again Christianity, rejected the idea. If God wanted me to be a woman, he would have made me a woman, he told me. I'd rather die as a man. And so he did. His cancer went untreated, except by, Rory often said, the healing power of God. I don't know if Rory really believed that God would heal him, because you never could tell a lie from the truth when it came out of my uncle's mouth. But I do know for certain that God didn't show up to prevent Rory's untimely and extremely unpleasant death. I attended Rory's funeral with my father, but he was the only one of Rory's 4 siblings who darkened the doorway. The others being so sick of his schemes that they were convinced the funeral was a trick to get them all in one place so Rory could ask for money. When I asked my dad why he went when no one else would, he said, Rory was an insufferable asshole, but he was still my brother. Despite the lack of blood relations, the funeral hall was packed to capacity with people I had never met, all of whom insisted on shaking my hand while they professed their love for Rory. They all told me that Rory loved me very much and spoke of me often. They also told me that I should be proud of him, because he was a light spot in the dark lives that had blessed them all with his abundant generosity. When I sat down next to my dad at the beginning of the service, I asked, "Are they here for the same funeral we are?" My father just shrugged. You never know which version of Rory those people met. So we observe Rory shuffle off this mortal coil in the same manner we observed his life, with bewildered looks on our faces as we tried to decipher the truth from the bullshit. Thanks very much for joining me. I hope you liked it.